A scream close by hammered fear into my chest. Yet again we were running towards a horrible sound, praying we wouldn't be too late, only to have our worst fears realized. Nick was the first to turn a corner and I slammed into his back. In the hallway was a similar sight to Nightshade and Nightingale. Clear was on her back, a stab wound over her heart, and her servant slumped against the wall. We just heard her scream. How did this happen so fast? Elizabeth's bodyguard was alive and looking over the two, but without a weapon. It wasn't clear if he was the one who killed the pair or not. She ran past us, ignoring everyone to go to Clear, with a hand on the other woman's cheek. She let silent tears fall. These were rivals, but they didn't hate each other. In fact, they might be the only people who understood each other's struggles the most. We let her mourn for a few minutes. Collecting herself, she faced her bodyguard to ask what happened before they arrived. The large man started to use sign language. Nodding along, Elizabeth translated for us. My servant Ernest was following Clear and her bodyguard. They all heard a sound that they assumed to be the killer and followed that instead of Webb. Clear's species are very fast runners, but they only were out of sight for about a minute until Ernest could catch up. They were already dead and there was no sign of the killer. We looked down the hallway in case he missed something. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, and no blood spatters from the wounds. Based on how the bodies were, Clear and her servant ran right past their attacker. It was a hallway we had already cleared. Each spell had locked the doors, making it impossible for the killer to be waiting inside while they ran past to attack from behind. If they attacked from the front, wouldn't at least one of them get an attack in or attempt to run away? This killer had abilities we simply could not figure out. I feared the only way to get more answers was for another person to be killed. I noticed Webb stayed behind. At least that ruled him and Elizabeth out. She could tell we all suspected her bodyguard, but she fiercely defended him without any of us commenting on it. Ernest owed her family his life. He would never betray them, and would never have a reason to kill anyone unless ordered. He also could not lie to Elizabeth due to a curse he let her family place on him. She outright asked if he was behind any of this and he refused. That didn't mean she wasn't lying, but I wanted to trust her. I wanted to get back and regroup. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Nick tense up at the same time as the rest of them. I was again being dragged down a hallway. I asked what was wrong because I didn't hear anything this time. Luna replied saying they all felt a power so strong the iron couldn't block out all of it, and it was coming from the room where we left Webb and Mermere. I hated the man, but I didn't want anything to happen to his servant. Unfortunately, the worst happened yet again. The room was completely destroyed. Elizabeth couldn't handle the sight so soon after seeing her friend's body. She swooned in the door. Nick caught her along with Ernest. I didn't want Luna seeing this either. I set them down to go inside the room to see if Webb and Mermere were dead as well. There was no question on Webb. His neck was twisted like a dish rack. Terrible wounds scarred his chest as dark blood with a blue sheen stained his suit. Mermere next to him, eyes closed and not breathing. At least his death appeared to be quick. I checked for a pulse, finding nothing. Tears threatened my vision. I needed to keep it together. There was no time for a breakdown. Elizabeth couldn't hold one back though. She was completely hysterical. I left behind the two newest murder victims to help the others deal with her. She was crying and literally throwing fire at anyone who dared get close. She kept screaming at Nick and I to finish our job of sweeping the mansion or else she would be next. Ernest could get a hold of her, but hadn't done so, fearing he would harm her. We just needed to let her burn herself out. I didn't blame her for the reaction. She'd seen a friend die, and a creature more powerful than herself not stand a chance. It was a bit tough dodging her fire, but we finally got her calm enough to bring her to another room, finding a comfy chair for her. She sat down, eyes red from tears and subdued from the outburst. I tried talking with her, but she kept saying that we needed to finish looking through the mansion to find the killer. Leaving her and Ernest behind was out of the question until Luna spoke up. We could seal this room. Anyone who tries to enter it could get a nasty blowback. It might not kill them, but it would give a warning for Ernest and Elizabeth. Why didn't you do this before? Elizabeth said in a distant voice. I'm really not that strong to make a blowback spell. I would need to use some of your magic. And honestly, if I suggested it before, would you have accepted being locked inside a room by a stranger you don't know the intentions of and with others that may be plotting to kill you, and borrowing some of your magic making you weaker to boot? On top of those points, I knew Webb wouldn't go for the suggestion. It would have been another fight and he could easily broken the spell if everyone voted against him. Now with him gone, and Elizabeth convinced the killer wasn't any of us in the room, the suggestion could be made. She refused to come with us to check the rest of the mansion, and agreed to be sealed inside the room. It was the only option we could think of in the moment. At least there would be a little bit of protection for them as we were gone. Luna worked on the spell by the door and we locked Elizabeth and Ernest in with her permission. My chest hurt and my head was swimming. Nick and Luna were the only thing keeping me grounded. People were dropping all around us without being stopped. Not even a single hint was revealed from all the murders. Luna's small hand was in mine as we started towards the part of the mansion we hadn't checked yet. Nick appeared distracted. His pace was slow as if he couldn't walk and think at the same time. "Nicky, what are you thinking?" I asked, and we all paused. "All of this bothers me. The corporation would know if this was all a planned murder plot. This must have been a valid dinner invite, but perhaps someone found out. They used it to murder the ones here. But I am not aware of a creature that can move so freely and without being noticed, nor any motives to kill all of the guests," Nick explained, slightly pacing on the spot. "We honestly didn't know enough about the group to know why anyone would want them dead. Luna only had basic knowledge of their families. It was all very frustrating. Only one guest was left that we could question, but she wasn't in the right mindset for such a discussion. In that moment, our limited choice was just to clear the mansion. Nicky and I were feeling the same way about being without answers all while being in danger. Nick made some notes in a small notebook. If we got any more answers, more would go in those pages. We fell back into clearing the remaining rooms. The small dinner wasn't sitting right. Every new door we opened, I expected something to be inside. The stress was getting to me. Sweat started on the back of my neck. I strained to hear any kind of signs in the empty mansion. My phone wasn't working, so it was impossible to tell how long we kept looking. Nick noticed how stressed I was. He paused outside a door to look over just as I was about to walk inside the room next to his. "Do you need a break?" he offered. I shook my head. It was best to finish our job first. I could deal with it for a bit longer. The images of each of the killed guests kept flashing in my mind, making it difficult not to take Nick up on his offer. He reluctantly let us continue on. When a crashing sound came from the room Nick just entered, I nearly had a heart attack. I stumbled over my own feet to run out into the hallway, frantic to check on Nick. Just as I came out of the room, Nick also came out. He appeared fine and I was confused. "Sorry, I just tripped over a mirror," he explained, and let out a sigh of relief. "Nicky really shouldn't scare me like that. There are so many mirrors around this place. I should have been the first one to trip over one in the dark." I forgave him so I could go back to checking the room I just left. But something stopped me. It was the look on Nick's face. He was a little embarrassed with an awkward smile. The sight suddenly gave me vertigo. My mind clued into something I didn't fully realize yet. There was something wrong with that expression I couldn't place. It finally clicked. Why was he smiling? Nick never smiled. At least, not like that. I ensured Luna was tight in my arms and the child was confused on my shift of mood. "You know, Nicky, I'm pretty glad you gave me that emerald cell phone charm. I carry it around for good luck and I feel like we need it for this case," I said, and my heart nearly beat out of my chest as I waited. The smile came back over his face. Taking a slow step back, I waited for his response. "Of course, you're my friend after all." I nearly choked on my fear. This wasn't Nicky. He didn't sound right. His smile reached his eyes. He looked identical to him down to the orchestra at his waist, but there was no way this was my partner. Somehow, the imposter noticed how I was able to figure out his ruse. The moment he ran towards us, I was already moving, unable to get very far. I shot into the empty room and slammed the door, using my own body to hold it shut. I bounced off as the fake Nick's shoulder checked it. Luna's hair reached down to lock the door as they started to draw a spell on the door to lock us in and the fake Nick out. This really wasn't going to help Luna to like Nicky anytime soon. When the spell kicked in, he stopped trying to break in, but I wasn't relieved. "I'll be back for you too, once that woman is taken care of. All of this is going to be over." The voice from the other side of the locked door sounded a little bit like Nick's but worked. It had a slight echo making my skin crawl. My guess was right, but where was the real Nick? Was he all right? We needed to find him, but we also needed to get to Elizabeth. Luna leapt from my arms to race over to the wall on the other side of the room. "What are you doing?" I asked, confused. "I think I know what that creature is. Nick might have been switched in the other room and left behind. I'm going to blow down the wall to get to the room next to us," Luna explained. "What? Who took in Luna? Why did this child know such a dangerous spell?" I wasn't able to stop it. Luna's swift hands had the spell finished within seconds. With barely enough time, we took cover behind some furniture as the plaster of the walls were blasted through. At least we got lucky and the entire mansion wasn't lined with iron. Luna was right on the guess of Nick being left behind. He was on the ground, covered by dust from the blown apart wall. I took off running to see if he was all right. I dreaded seeing a stab wound in his chest. Sliding beside him, I quickly checked him over. Nicky was still breathing, but with a bleeding cut on his forehead. The creature only knocked him out in order to do the switch. I was never so relieved in my life. They hit him with a sleeping spell. "He won't be up for a few hours," Luna commented. That was bad. Without Nick, we would be lacking in power to save Elizabeth. He might not forgive me for leaving him behind and charging into danger. I grabbed the orchestra from his waist, ready to take off running. The look on Luna's face made me pause. "You're not worried about me? I mean, if Nick was a fake, You should assume I was replaced too. How do you know I'm the real one? Luna asked, bringing up a point I should have thought about. The fact Nick didn't know anything I didn't mention while we weren't here? I guess, if you weren't the real Luna, you wouldn't dislike Nick so much. At least I think so. Besides, I just know who you are, I replied. I could be wrong. The fake Nick didn't know our history. If someone replaced Luna, they might have known we were friendly with the agents coming by but wouldn't know how Luna felt about Nick. Luna wasn't speaking when we last met, so it might be possible they were fake. Still, I couldn't think so. Luna was just, well, Luna. It was easy to tell who they were. The child seemed touched. With a nod, my answer was accepted. Leaving Nick behind was unavoidable. Luna and I took off running, hoping to reach Elizabeth in time. I could not forgive myself if one more person died. I was out of breath by the time we reached the room. My sides hurt from running so far. I needed to start exercising more after all of this. Luna took a minute to open the door. The spell not being broken yet was a good sign. Then I realized something. Ernest was away from her before. He could have been replaced by the time we locked them in together. I gripped the hilt of the orchestra, begging for her to be still alive. The door swung open and Elizabeth jumped out of her seat. She was safe but scared. Ernest was standing behind her, startled by our entrance. Elizabeth, come over here, please, I begged, running into the room. Ernest's face changed. He knew I was aware of the switch. I shouted to warn her as his hand came down. She jumped from the chair a moment before it exploded from his hand, crashing down. She let out a scream of shock but refused to believe what was going on. Ernest, what is wrong with you? She cried, tripping over her own feet. She tumbled over. A set of hands came from behind to grab at my shoulders. The fake Nick caught up. I struggled out of his grasp to run towards Elizabeth, getting between her and Ernest. I pulled at the orchestra, ready to defend her. My heart stopped when the sword refused to be drawn. I pulled without anything happening. Elizabeth shrieked as another attack came. I put the scabbard up as shield. As the heavy blow came down, caught by the polished surface, it traveled through my arms. One more blow like that would either break my arms or the sword. The false Nick turned towards Luna, ready to grab at the child, looking over the scene. It all was so hopeless. Elizabeth too stunned to fight. Luna's hair ready to strike, but I worried about their power. And for some reason, our only weapon refused to be used. We should have died. A bell rang out through the room, causing everyone to freeze. Stand down, please. It's over. I'll be there in a few minutes. A tired female voice came from somewhere unknown. Saying we were confused was an understatement. Ernest's face shifted until it turned to a reflective blank surface. The fake Nick's face did the same. Both of them dropped their threatening poses and quickly went over to Elizabeth, fretting. Are you all right? I'm sorry. Were you hurt at all? The false Ernest said in the warped voice. A second ago he was trying to kill her, but now he was worried. What the hell was going on? To my shock, when Elizabeth tripped, her dress tangled and was pulled down. It was barely covering her chest. So I dropped all the other issues to get down to ready the straps for her. She looked near tears, but thankful for the consideration. The owner of the voice came into the room. We all stared at her. She wore a long lab coat with a turtleneck sweater, slouching over. Her posture appeared as tired as her eyes behind a set of glasses. A large set of animal ears poked out from muddy brown hair. A long fluffy tail somewhat hidden by her lab coat. Luna's eyes lit up, seeing the newcomer. Mom, what are you doing here? Mom, I've been asking this question all night, but what the hell was happening? Luna jumped into the woman's arms, showing she wasn't a threat. And yet people had died. Seriously, what was going on? What? I was unable to form a proper sentence. A wave of exhaustion hit. And if I wasn't already sitting, I would have fallen over. Let's get settled in the other room. I'll explain everything, the woman said, and left us to get collected enough to follow. There better be a damn good explanation for all of this. The room we were lead inside had a table where we found seats. A plate of cookies was set in the middle, which only Luna touched. Elizabeth and I sat next to each other while the false creatures stood behind the women, next to a different creature I've never seen before. It was made of mirror shards fashioned into a human shape. A whip-like tail made of more shards was moving behind it. 2 triangles sat on the top of its head and almost looked like cartoon cat ears. I guess I'll get started. My name is Serval Lark. I work for the corporation. This entire thing was set up by them and the families of the ones invited. The woman started. So, my family wanted me dead. Elizabeth yelled in a rage. Serval didn't really react. She looked behind at the 3 creatures with an open hand. One of them gave her a sword, which she placed on the table. This is the Juliet blade. If you are stabbed by it, you appear dead for a day. The ones who are dead are fine. They'll wake up, she explained, making Elizabeth's jaw drop open. This blade isn't well known. Your families didn't want you dead, but they wanted you to have a fear of death. Wait, this is a bit much. Can you back up a little? I asked, head starting to hurt. Serval was tired. but she shrugged, not being affected by our reactions. Nightshade refused to learn self-defense. He simply wants to read. Clear relied too heavily on their servant and was only concerned about drama. Webb as well. A massive dick. He was convinced no one could ever touch him. And, I hate to insult someone to their face, but your parents felt that you are lacking some skills. You all have power enough to defend yourselves, but due to your upbringing you can't or won't use it. And you never appeared worried about it either. Without facing death, they feared you might not change. Elizabeth's face grew red from embarrassment and rage. She was going to get up and try and strangle Serval. I offered my hand for her to squeeze, and for some reason she took it. This all sounded so extreme. I didn't want to believe parents would put their children through such a thing. Then again, they weren't human. Their thinking was completely different than my own. Then why invite Nick, Luna and myself? I asked, and Serval finally reacted. Well, that was a personal act on my part. Luna's goal is to become an agent like yourself to save others. I wanted to give them experience under safe conditions, and I wanted to meet you, but needed to invite you with your partner. After all, I've been hearing so much about the Uncle Skylar that Luna has been going on about. Luna choked on the cookies they were shoving in their mouth. With a loud cry of embarrassment, small hands tugged at the lab coat, feeling betrayed. As they spoke, my mind ran through the events of the night. Nightshade would have noticed something different about his partner. That was what he wanted to speak about before. There was the lack of blood because they weren't really dead. And if their servants were switched, it explained why none of them fought back. My head shot up. Something was wrong about all of this. With everyone watching, I ran from the room. I needed to make sure. I threw open the door where we left Murmur and Webb. The room still destroyed, but one thing changed. Murmur was sitting next to Webb's body. He didn't look over at first. When Serval arrived, the man finally looked up. Serval didn't appear as shocked, almost as if she expected this to happen. I'm not his tool, Murmur said in a weak voice. The words hurt my chest. When they were alone, Murmur took that as his chance to kill the man who abused him for his entire life. He didn't resist when the mirror creatures helped him to his feet. His target was already dead. I warned Webb's parents this may happen, but they assumed their son was too strong. Serval commented with a sigh. The mirror creatures brought Murmur into a large mirror in the side of the room. If they could travel between them, that explained how they jumped around without being caught. Elizabeth joined us, looking as tired as we all felt. What's going to happen to him? I asked, wondering about what kind of punishment was suitable for this kind of crime. I'm not certain. I'm going to look into the suspicion of the fact the Webb family controls their servants by forcing their true name from them. If that's the case, the punishment would be minor. Elizabeth let out a gasp. Her face paled. I needed to keep her steady, and I didn't understand what upset her so much. Seeing my expression, Elizabeth shook her head. Every creature has a true name. That doesn't really describe what it is, though. It's like a part of our soul, a word that entails everything we are. Not even our parents know it. It's so private we only reveal it to the ones we trust beyond our lives. To force it from a creature is an unforgivable sin, she explained. I feared that was the case. Webb abused his servant in a way I would never be able to understand. He deserved his fate. If this revealed what the rest of his family was doing, Murmur sacrificed his freedom for the rest of the servants. In the end, everything was explained. Serval returned the real Ernest, who gave Elizabeth a rushing hug before frantically signing, trying to see if she was all right, and apologized for being snatched away. I still didn't think something so extreme was needed to make these rich creatures learn a lesson. Poor Elizabeth was traumatized along with the rest when they finally woke up. Serval was going to send me home and promised to tell Nick what happened after he woke up, but he came stumbling down the hallway, head still bleeding, the sleep spell making him drowsy. But he fought through it to ensure we all were still alive. We found him a chair and slowly explained what was going on. After it all finally sank in, I handed back the orchestra. The scabbard now scuffed. Did the sword know about all this? I couldn't draw it. Maybe it didn't want to attack someone who looked like you. I wondered out loud, trying to figure out why the weapon refused to be used. The sword rattled, and Nick understood what it was saying. Oh, no, it says it refused to let you wield it until you learn which end is the sharp one, Nick said in a small voice. Are you kidding me? The sword risked my life because I forgot a word. So, what if I called the scabbard something else once, or twice, maybe a few more times? Here I thought I became friends with the sword. We fought together, and it dumped me so quickly. How did Nick deal with this sword for so long? I'm glad it got the scabbard scuffed. Now, with everyone on the same page, we all were ready to head home. I collected a way to contact Elizabeth and Serval. They both said they would be busy, but promised they would do their best to reply. When everyone wasn't looking, Elizabeth placed a kiss on my cheek, causing my ears be as red as her hair. I may have made a few new friends on this trip. It was almost worth the stress. I wanted to forget the entire night, It was far too raw to think about. I was reminded of it a few days later when a person met me outside my office. Someone I was very glad to see alive and well. Nightshade stood, appearing mostly human, his wings gone and long black hair tucked under a hat. "Are you busy?" he asked in a low voice. I was told he finished his self-defense classes in a few days. More were lined up, but he earned a break. The man nearly begged to be taken to a bookshop and didn't know any other humans to ask. There was a used bookshop down the street of my office, so we left in his fancy car when Nightingale drove up. His servant also wanted to go inside the store, but they both were doing their best to let Nightshade do some things on his own. With a wallet full of fresh bills, the dark creature needed to be held back from buying everything in the shop. In the next hour, we took many trips to his car, loading it up with pounds after pounds of second-hand romance books. After the trip, he tried handing me the leftover cash for my time, but it was far too much. He assured me I had earned it, saying those books in his world were worth far more than the human cash he was paying for them and my help. He also wanted to thank me for the information of where the bookstore was located. I told him there were a few more in the city that I could take him to, and his eyes lit up. The cash was shoved in my hands and we promised to go shopping again. I thought he was the only creature I had made friends with. A package from Clear proved me wrong. Inside was a glittering chain made of small gemstones. It was worth more than I might ever make. I could never sell such a gift, and it was quickly placed in a safety deposit box. The note attached to the gift was thanking me for sharing the cheesecake at dinner and for protecting her only friend. Creatures really liked human food way more than I realized. I sent a message to Elizabeth to see how she was doing. I was starting to fear she would read too much into that message. I really needed to be careful about not dating a supernatural creature. With the rate of how things were going, however, I was almost certain that was how I was going to end up.